Sometime around AD 296, the Second Augustan Legion left Caerleon. For the better part of 2 centuries, they'd been here. They'd lived here, trained and marched the roads, and helped hold Roman power in Western Britain. Then they disappear mysteriously from the record. The second mystery is even stranger, though, because in Caerleon, people still claim to hear them marching on the old Roman road, buried underneath modern houses and tarmac. Now, when people talk about vanished Roman legions, the Ninth Legion usually gets all the attention, and fair enough, it is a celebrity disappearance. But Caerleon has a case of its own, and in some ways a stranger one, because here the mystery isn't just that the legion slips out of the record, it's that people still claim to hear it marching. Hi, I'm Harriet. In this episode, we're going to look at what happened to the Legion and the twist at the end of their story. And we're going to explore why the ghost stories here feel so unusually specific. So let's begin. Both of the mysteries that we're going to look at start in the same place. Caerleon, or Isca Augusta, was one of only 3 permanent legionary fortresses in Roman Britain. The others were in York and Chester. So this wasn't some half-forgotten outpost where Rome was improvising with a few tents and a nervous centurion. This was a major military base, a proper piece of imperial infrastructure, planted here because the Romans meant business. And they chose the site well. It stood by the River Usk, on solid ground, with good access inland and out towards the wider province. And once they built here, they did what Romans usually did when they were confident and organised. They built it for the long haul. The fortress covered 50 acres, laid out in the standard Roman playing card shape, and it was designed to house over 5,000 soldiers. They had the usual Roman buildings: headquarters, barracks, workshops, a hospital and command buildings, roads, walls and gates. It wasn't glamorous, perhaps, but it was very effective. Rome rarely did casual. Around AD 100, the walls were rebuilt in stone, and the construction was substantial enough that sections still stand to 3.5 metres today. Outside the walls stood an amphitheatre, and it was used for training, ceremonies, and the public theatre of empire. It seated around 6,000 people, which was more than the garrison itself, and it was the social and military heart of the site for 2 centuries. What makes Caerleon so useful now is that so much of it survived. York and Chester became busy later cities, which is good for them but less helpful if you're trying to peer into Roman Britain. Caerleon developed more lightly, which meant large parts of the fortress were buried rather than obliterated. The barracks are the most complete Roman legionary barracks open to the public anywhere in Europe. The amphitheatre is the most complete in Britain. And most important for this story, the Roman road system didn't vanish. In places, it simply ended up underneath the modern town. For all their discipline and bureaucracy, the Romans may have accidentally made themselves extremely hauntable. The Second Augustan Legion already had a history before Caerleon, though. It came to Britain in AD 43 as part of the Roman invasion force, serving under the future Emperor Vespasian. But Caerleon is where the story takes root. Because this wasn't a legion passing through on campaign, this was home. For roughly 2 centuries, the Second Augustan Legion was based here, and over that time, it became part of the place itself. 2 centuries is a very long time, long enough for generations of soldiers to pass through the same barracks, march the same roads, and use the same gates. The Roman presence here was constant and organised in a way that left physical traces everywhere. 85 inscribed stones from Caerleon are recorded in the Roman inscriptions of Britain: building dedications, altars and tombstones, 32 of them naming individual soldiers. These are real people, not just names in stone, and you can picture the rhythm of it easily enough. Drill in the yard, orders in headquarters, men moving along the roads in full kit. Men writing things down because the Romans were incapable of leaving administration alone. Ceremonies in the amphitheatre. Not just soldiers with shields, in other words, but a whole working Roman world. Organised, noisy, very sure of itself. So a legion that spends so long stamping itself into place ought to leave a tidy ending behind. You'd think so. But instead, the record begins to thin, and then it stops altogether. So what actually happened to the Second Augustan Legion at Caerleon? By the late 3rd century, Roman Britain was in turmoil. Carausius seized power in AD 287 and set himself up as ruler of Britain and northern Gaul. After his murder, Electus took over, and in AD 296, Constantius moved to retake the province. It was a tense, unstable moment, and Roman military priorities were shifting fast. That wider crisis fits the archaeology at Caerleon rather well. The coin sequence ends in AD 296, which is one of the clearest markers you can ask for at a Roman military site. Coins moved constantly through a place like this, through pay, trade, and daily routine, and when that flow stops, you know something significant has changed. By then, the fortress was already being dismantled. Archaeology points to a systematic demolition beginning around AD 290. Not buildings quietly slumping into ruin or soldiers wandering off and leaving the place to rot, but a deliberate reduction. Stone was being removed, probably for use elsewhere, and the process looks ordered and practical. Someone had decided this fortress no longer needed to remain intact. So the accepted view is that Caerleon was stripped to support a new military need. The western fortress was reduced, its stone reused, and its garrison, or at least a very large part of it, was likely redirected towards coastal defence as the regime prepared for reconquest. That isn't romantic, but it is very Roman. If circumstances changed, they moved troops, reused materials, and just got on with it. So the Second Augustan Legion didn't vanish in some dramatic last stand or disappear into the Welsh hills. It seems to have been caught up in the political and military upheaval of late Roman Britain as forts were reduced, resources shifted, and the map of power was redrawn in a hurry. But what keeps this mystery alive is that the broad explanation is clear, but the actual departure isn't. There's no surviving order saying the Legion left on this date under this commander for this exact destination. There's no farewell inscription and no neat final scene. Some activity continued at Caerleon into the 4th century. Streets were resurfaced and parts of the sites remained in use. But the Second Augustan Legion, as the long-established garrison of Caerleon, was gone by around AD 300. So that's the first mystery. Not that there's no explanation at all, because there is. It's just that a legion so deeply rooted in one place still manages to leave without giving us a satisfying ending that we'd all like. And then, more than a century later, something unexpected happens. In the late 4th or early 5th century, Roman administrators compiled a document called the Notitia Dignitatum. It's an administrative handbook listing every military posting across the Western Roman Empire, kind of document a bureaucracy produces when it wants to believe the empire is still functioning as intended. One entry records a unit of the Second Augustan Legion, stationed at Richborough on the Kent coast. That's 200 miles from Caerleon. More than a century has passed since the departure from Wales, and nobody can say with any confidence what the relationship is between that unit and the legion that left. Was it the same body of men, battered and reduced and shuffled from posting to posting until they ended up watching the Saxon shore? Was it a skeleton unit, a name preserved on a list because someone needed a name for that posting? Was it a small detachment that outlasted the main garrison while everyone else was dispersed or disbanded? The Second Augustan Legion is never mentioned again. This is their last entry in their file. And here's where the story turns. Gerald of Wales visited in 1188 and described ruins so palatial he could barely account for them. Geoffrey of Monmouth made it Arthur's capital. The amphitheatre became known locally as King Arthur's Round Table, which tells you everything you need to know about what happens when people find a large circular depression in the ground and need an explanation for it. When Mortimer Wheeler excavated the amphitheatre in 1926, he exploited the Arthurian connection to raise money from the Daily Mail, who provided £1,000 for exclusive rights to daily reports on the dig, and then they trebled the offer. Whether Wheeler believed any of it is a question he probably didn't ask himself very much. The association was useful and he used it. Arthur Machen was born in Caerleon in 1863 and grew up walking the ruins. He left for London and in 1894 published a novella called The Great God Pan, a story about something from an older and deeper world breaking through the surface of the present. He wrote in his autobiography that the Roman ruins of Caerleon, the nearby site at Caerwent, were directly behind it, the sensation of ancient presence pressing through. Stephen King later described it as perhaps the best horror story in the English language. It influenced Bram Stoker and H.P. Lovecraft, and that entire tradition of cosmic horror begins, if you follow it back, to a boy in South Wales walking along a ruined Roman fortress. Reports of Roman soldiers at the amphitheatre and barracks have been circulating for a long time. Figures seen pacing as if on patrol and apparitions near the old burial ground. These accounts are difficult to verify because they have no named witnesses and no datable events, nothing really to cross-reference against the historical record. But then there's the marching. Museum Wales has recorded that more than one person has reported hearing soldiers marching around the perimeter of the fortress. And the detail that stays with me is this: the sound of hobnailed boots and the shout of the Latin marching command, sin dex, left, right, can only be heard in the houses which stand over the old Roman road that once ran around the outside of the fortress. So it's not being recorded just anywhere in Caerleon. It's being recorded specifically in the houses built over that road. Now, if you've seen my Roman York Ghost Soldiers video, you'll know why that detail matters. Harry Martindale saw Roman soldiers in a cellar in York in 1953, visible only from the knees up. Later excavations found a Roman road buried at exactly the depth that would explain his sighting. The soldiers weren't walking through the room, they were walking on the road, and the road was underground. The marching at Caerleon follows the same logic. The sound tracks the road that most people walking through town don't even know is there. Second Augustan Legion left Caerleon around AD 296. They dismantled their fortress, took their stone and marched out. The historical record doesn't follow them far, but in the houses on the streets of Caerleon, built over a road these soldiers walked for 200 years, people are still hearing the march. Whether that means anything is a question I'll leave up to you, but the history is real, the departure is documented, and the silence that follows is the kind that historians don't have a comfortable explanation for. So let me know in the comments below what you think. I'd love to read them. And if you've enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing or even becoming a member. I'll see you next time.